miles away, in the high canyons that fed the Verde Valley. Chayton observed the dust plume. It was another wagon, another scar on the earth, moving toward the raw settlement of Red Mesa. He was Ende, an Apache warrior. His stillness was that of the land itself. He had learned patience from the hawks and endurance from the stone. His discipline was absolute, but it was not directed toward the shallow glory of battle. He had seen enough glory to last a lifetime. His focus was on the ones who could not fight the elders who held the stories and the children who would carry them forward. They were the meaning. His strength was a shield for them, not a spear for his own pride. The iron snake was coming. He had watched the surveyors with their strange tripods. He knew the name Harlan Collier. He knew they intended to force a path through Coyote Pass. This act would sever the valley, bleed the water, and push his people from the only ground that understood their language. The papers had already been drawn up. He knew, full of lies to justify the theft. The wagon, coated in the pervasive red grit, pulled to a halt at the edge of the settlement. The wind that crossed the high mesa did not bother to whisper. It scoured. It was the last breath of the 1870s, and it tasted of iron and futures being forced into the land. Evelyn Hart, 26 years old, set the brake, her hands steady on the reins. She was a trained physician in a world that had little patience for such things, and an itinerant photographer in a land that was trying to erase its history. She had arrived to open a mobile aid station, a place of healing in a landscape dedicated to abrasion. Far to the north, the San Francisco peaks held on to their winter snow, a distant promise of water. The smell of that faraway snow, sharp and clean, managed to cut through the closer scents of juniper, hot rock, and the raw lumber of the town. She checked the supplies in her heavy, reinforced wagon. The medical trunks were secure, filled with quinine, carbolic acid, and bandages. Beside them rested the heavy, polished wooden box holding her camera, and tucked beneath her seat was a worn leather satchel. It contained her mother's legacy, a collection of old maps, their surveys and markings cryptic, their origin a puzzle Evelyn had yet to solve. Red Mesa was watching her. The town was less a home than an argument with the desert, existing for the coming railroad. The town's law. Sheriff Pike stood in the wide street, his thumbs hooked in his belt, his gaze flat and assessing. He was a broad man who served the railroad's interests, and everyone knew it. The interests of Harlan Collier, further out, barely visible, was the fort, flying the United States flag. It was run by a Captain Mercer, a man supposedly tasked with keeping the peace, though whose peace remained to be seen. Evelyn ignored the stares and began her work. She unhitched her team and raised the heavy canvas of her aid tent. The work was hard, but it grounded her. The rumors began almost immediately. A woman doctor was a curiosity, but the rumors shifted, darkened, when an old ND woman, her face a map of dignified pain, approached the tent that afternoon. Her grandson, a boy of 10, had a badly infected foot. Evelyn knelt in the dust, her voice low and calm. She cleaned the wound, applied a poultice, and bound it in clean linen. She offered the woman a small tin of salve and clear instructions, speaking slowly, using her hands to demonstrate. The act was seen. It was noted by Pike, who spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. It was discussed in the saloon that night. The new doctor was an Indian lover. In a town fueled by Collier's narrative of Apache harassment and savage raids, Evelyn's simple act of medicine was a political statement. She knew this. She felt the chill in the air when she entered the general store. But she had made her choice long ago. She treated the living. She did not categorize the pain. The next morning, the light was sharp and new. Evelyn was checking her chemical mixtures when she saw him, an Apache child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, peering at her from behind a stack of discarded lumber. He was all eyes, a mixture of profound caution and bold curiosity. Evelyn felt the familiar pull. This was the other part of her work. Medicine healed the body, but the light, captured correctly, could heal the truth. She moved without suddenness. She brought the heavy box from the wagon, setting the tripod's legs firmly in the dirt. This was not a quick process. It was a negotiation with the light. "Hello," she said, her voice soft. She did not move toward him. She began her setup, polishing the lens. The boy watched, unmoving. He associated tripods with the surveyors, the men who stole the land. Evelyn saw his tension. She slid one of the prepared glass plates into the camera back. "This is different," she said, more to herself than to him. "This just holds the light. It makes a memory." She ducked under the heavy black cloth, the world inverted, hazy. She adjusted the focus. The heat under the cloth was immediate. She emerged, pushing damp hair back from her forehead. The boy had not moved. He was judging her. She held up the brass lens cap. "It will not hurt. It is just for a moment." She waited. The world seemed to hold its breath. The distant ring of a hammer on steel, the railroad advancing, was the only sound. Then the boy's suspicion fractured. A slow smile spread across his face. Uncertain at first, then blossoming into a moment of pure, unguarded joy. It was a smile that knew nothing of railroads or treaties. A perfect declaration of life in the harsh sun. Evelyn's hands were sure. She uncapped the lens. She counted the seconds, her mind clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She replaced the cap. "It is done," she whispered. She had it, the light, the smile, the truth of the moment, trapped in silver on the glass. The boy, his duty as observer apparently complete, vanished. He did not run, he simply dissolved back into the landscape. Evelyn began the careful work of packing her plate, protecting it from the light. She did not know what was coming. She did not know that Sheriff Pike was already walking toward her, his shadow falling long and heavy in the morning sun. She only knew that she held a photograph of a smiling Apache child, a piece of evidence that, in this place of lies, might be the most powerful medicine she had. The shadow was Sheriff Pike. He did not bother to knock on the wagon. He simply stood there, blocking the morning light, forcing her to look at him. "Ma'am," he said. The word was not a courtesy. It was a boundary. Evelyn Hart stepped down from the wagon, wiping her chemical-stained hands on a rag. She was tall, but he was wider, planted in the dirt like an anvil. "Sheriff," she replied, her voice even. "This here is Red Mesa," he continued, as if she were lost. "It is a railroad town, a white town. We got our own ways, and taking pictures of Apache children is not one of them." Evelyn finished packing the glass plate, securing it in its light-proof box. "I am a photographer. Sheriff. I capture what I see." "Then you best look the other way." His gaze moved from the camera to the canvas tent flap, painted with the words, "Aid Station." And that, treating them is worse. It encourages them, makes them comfortable. Evelyn met his flat gaze. "I am a doctor. I treat who needs treating. This aid station is open to everyone. Sheriff, that is not going to change." Pike let out a short, dry laugh. He looked over her wagon, his eyes cataloging the supplies. "That's a heap of medicine? Doctor, quinine, laudanum? Things men pay good money for. Things that are easy to lose out here in the high country. Real easy." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near her boot. "You have a good day, ma'am." He turned and walked away, his steps heavy and certain. The threat lingered in the air, thick as the red dust. She spent the day organizing, the encounter hardening her resolve rather than weakening it. She would not be intimidated. By late afternoon, she realized her stock of carbolic acid was lower than she liked, and she needed more clean linen. The weekly freight wagon was not due for 2 days, but she knew supplies were often dropped at the survey camp 5 miles east. She harnessed the horses, taking only the medical wagon, leaving the heavier tent and supplies. The road was barely a road, just parallel ruts cutting through the mesquite and rabbit brush. She had been traveling for perhaps an hour. The sun was hot on her left shoulder. The canyon walls were rising, the track dipping into a dry arroyo. It was quiet. Too quiet. They came from the rocks. 3 of them. They were white men, dressed in the rough clothing of railroad laborers or miners. They smelled of whiskey and desperation. These were not warriors. They were scavengers, the kind of men who followed booms and fed on the scraps. One grabbed the bridle of the lead horse, forcing the team to a jarring halt. The other 2 moved to the sides of the wagon. One held a rusting rifle, his hands shaking. "Just the medicine. Lady," the rifleman said, his voice cracking. "We do not want no trouble. Just the laudanum and the quinine. Collier pays good for it." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Collier, these were not simple thieves. They were bounty hunters, paid to retrieve the very items Pike had mentioned. "There is no need for this," Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm, her hands raised and open. "You can have what you need. Just do not harm the horses." "Shut up," said the man at the bridle. He raised a pistol. He never had a chance to aim it. There was no sound of approach. One moment the man at the horse's head was standing, and the next he was on the ground, clutching a wrist that was clearly broken. Chayton was simply there. He had moved from the shadows of the rocks like a part of the landscape detaching itself. He did not carry a rifle. He held only a long, heavy staff of fire-hardened wood. The man with the rifle turned, fumbling with the weapon. Chayton's staff moved in a short, vicious arc, striking the rifle's stock and sending it flying. The staff continued its motion, catching the man in the stomach. He collapsed, the air driven from him in a desperate gasp. The third man, seeing his companions defeated in less than 5 seconds, dropped his knife and raised his hands, his eyes wide with terror. Chayton did not even look at him. He moved to the 2 men on the ground. He was not checking their wounds. He was systematic. He removed their pistols, their knives. He walked 20 paces and threw the weapons far into a dense thicket of cholla cactus, where they would not be easily retrieved. He did not kill. He did not maim. He had neutralized the threat with a terrifying efficiency. He was a storm of focused discipline. He turned to Evelyn. His face was severe, his black hair held back by a simple band. He was breathing as calmly as if he had just been walking. "They were not trying to rob you," he said. His English was clear, measured. "They were sent." "Harlan Collier," Evelyn said. It was not a question. "Yes, he wants you gone." Chayton looked up the track, toward the distant notch in the mountains. "He is blasting Coyote Pass. He has papers. He says—" "Papers that say the Ende must leave the Verde Valley. They are lies, prepared by men he bought. He has bought the soldiers at the fort to enforce these papers." Evelyn stared at him, the pieces fitting together. The railroad, the fort, Pike's threats. And now this. He wants the land. He wants the silver in the land. He wants the path for his iron snake. The people are in his way. "You," Chayton said, his dark eyes meeting hers, "are helping the people, so you are in his way." She was speechless for a moment. The scale of it was overwhelming. "They will come back," Chayton said, "or others will. Your tent is not safe in that town." He looked at her for a moment longer, a look of calculation, perhaps assessing her strength. Then, as silently as he had arrived, he turned and stepped back into the rocks. He did not seem to walk. He just blended with the patterns of shadow and stone. And then he was gone. Evelyn's hands were shaking, but she forced them to be still. She checked the men. One had a broken wrist. The other would be bruised for a month. The third was still trembling. She left them a canteen of water and a roll of bandages. Her oath was to heal, and it was an oath she would not break. Not even for them. She turned the wagon around and drove back to Red Mesa, the 5 miles seeming like 50. She was no longer just a doctor. She was a witness. The next morning, She did not wait for Pike to come to her. She went to the fort. Captain Mercer was the opposite of Sheriff Pike. His uniform was clean, his desk was organized, and his face was shaved. He looked like a man who believed in rules, a man caught between his duty and his geography. "Dr. Hart," he said, rising. He seemed surprised to see her. "Please, what can I do for you? I heard you had some trouble on the road yesterday." The Army surveillance was already in place. "News travels fast. Captain, I am here about the land. I am told there is a dispute." Mercer's expression became guarded. "We are here to keep the peace. Mr. Collier has a government contract for the railroad, and he has legal title." "Does he?" Evelyn asked. She placed her worn leather satchel on his desk. She had not planned this, but Chayton's words had given her a new kind of courage. She removed the roll of old maps. "I am a surveyor's granddaughter. These were my mother's." She unrolled one. It was brittle, the ink faded, but the lines were precise. Mercer looked at it politely, a mild curiosity in his eyes. Then he froze. He leaned closer, his fingers tracing a small, embossed stamp in the corner. "Survey," he read, his voice barely a whisper. 1849. He looked up at her, his professional calm shattered, replaced by a sharp, sudden intensity. "Where did you get this?" "I told you, my grandfather—" "This survey," Mercer said, his voice low and urgent. "It matches the old treaty boundaries, the ones the Apache claim, the ones Collier's papers ignore. This document, Doctor, if it is authentic, it secures the Verde Valley for the NDE." He straightened up, regaining his composure, but his mind was clearly racing. He was a man of paper, and she had just handed him a document that contradicted his orders. "Dr. Hart," he said, his tone now formal, careful. "I cannot overstate the importance of this. I would advise you to be extremely careful with this map and with your person." He stepped to the door. "I will look into this matter immediately. My office will, of course, cooperate fully with your aid station. We will ensure its safety." "Thank you, Captain," Evelyn said, gathering the map. "We will protect you," he said, "especially from men like Sheriff Pike." As she walked away from the fort, Evelyn knew she had not necessarily found an ally. She had found a man in a trap, and as she saw a soldier suddenly fall into step 100 yards behind her, she knew Mercer's protection was also surveillance. She returned to her tent and hammered a new, larger sign into the hard-baked earth. It read, "Red Mesa Aid Station. All are welcome." The rumors, which had been whispers, became a roar. "The woman doctor is helping the Indians." It was a charge of treason in this town. The proof of Collier's desperation came 2 days later. Captain Mercer, in a show of good faith prompted by the map, had arranged a small parley. He invited 2 Apache elders to meet him at the edge of the mesa, in neutral territory, to discuss the survey. Evelyn watched from a distance. It was a tense, fragile moment. The blue of the soldiers' uniforms and the earth tones of the Indo meeting under the vast white sky. Then came the explosion. It was not a single, sharp blast, but a rolling concussion that shook the ground. A massive plume of black smoke and red dust erupted from the mouth of Coyote Pass, 2 miles away. The parley dissolved. The elders vanished. Men in the town started yelling, "The Apache! They hit the rail line! They are attacking!" Evelyn knew it was a lie. It was Collier, an accidental dynamite charge, set off at the precise moment of the peace talk. He had sabotaged it, reinforcing the narrative that the Apache were violent and untrustworthy. The town was now an open wound. Pike's men, emboldened by the blast, marched through the street, their rifles held ready. They stopped and stared at her tent, their hatred of physical force. Collier had drawn his line. That night, the air was thick with the smell of dynamite and fear. Evelyn was packing her medical bag. her heart pounding. She did not know where she would go, only that she could not stay. The tent flap moved. Chayton was inside. He had made no sound. "You must go now," he said. He was not asking. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, clutching the bag. The explosion was Collier's signal. "He has finished talking. Pike's men will burn this tent tonight. They will say it was an accident, or that the ND did it to silence you." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "You must move. I know a place, a ramada, a shelter in the canyons. It is safe. My people will protect you. You can still help the sick. They will find you." Evelyn hesitated. To leave felt like surrender. "I cannot run away." "The boy you took the picture of," Chayton said, his voice softening by the smallest fraction. "His sister is sick, the coughing sickness. The old woman, Sani, is the midwife. She does all she can. They need your medicine. They will not come here now. Not after the blast. You are not running from the town. You are running to your patients." The patients. It always came back to them. She secured the strap of her bag. She picked up the wooden case holding her camera and the leather satchel holding the map. "I will go," she said, "but I am not finished. Not with Collier, and not with this map." "Good," Chayton said. He looked at the items in her hands. "Bring the map, and bring the box that steals the light. They are your weapons." The air in the tent was stifling, thick with the smell of chemicals and the certainty of violence. Evelyn Hart had just finished packing her medical bag. Chayton's warning echoed in the small space. "Pike's men will burn this tent tonight." She had the map. She had her camera. She was reaching for the last of the bandages when the night exploded with noise. It was not the sound of fire, but of shouting. "There he is! Grab him, thief!" Evelyn froze. She heard a scuffle, the heavy thud of boots on hard earth, and a young man's cry of pain. She pushed open the tent flap. Under the harsh yellow light of the saloon porch across the street, Sheriff Pike had a young Apache man by the arm. He was twisting it, forcing the man to his knees. It was Taza, the teenager whose quick mind Evelyn had noted, the one who had watched her from a distance. "Found him skulking by your wagon. Doctor!" Pike yelled, playing to the small crowd gathering. "Caught him red-handed with a bottle of your laudanum." Pike held up a small brown bottle. Evelyn's blood ran cold. It was a lie, a fabrication, clumsy but effective. "That is impossible," Evelyn said, walking into the street. Her voice was steady, though her heart beat against her ribs. "My medicines are locked." "He broke the lock," Pike said with a smirk. "These savages are clever. He was running off with this, poisoning himself, most likely, or selling it to the others." "Let him go, Sheriff. He did not steal that." "He was seen," Pike insisted. At that moment, a second group approached, this one orderly. Captain Mercer and two of his soldiers, their blue uniforms stark in the night. "Sheriff Pike," Mercer said, his voice clipped and official. "There is a disturbance. I was told Dr. Hart was in danger." His eyes moved from Pike to Taza, and then to Evelyn. His protective patrol had arrived. "No danger, Captain," Pike said, enjoying the attention. "Just catching a thief. This Apache boy stole medicines from the doctor. I am arresting him." Evelyn saw the trap. Pike did not need proof. He only needed the accusation. He was removing the ND one by one, creating a narrative of crime to justify their removal. She looked at Mercer. She looked at Pike. She looked at the camera case Chayton had told her was a weapon. "You are mistaken, Sheriff," she said clearly. She walked to her wagon, the one she had been packing to flee. She took a key from her pocket and unlocked the heavy medical trunk that held her main supply. The lock was intact. "Captain Mercer," she said, "you are a military man. You value a manifest. Please observe." She opened the trunk. Inside, the bottles were arrayed in their neat rows, secured by leather straps. The laudanum, quinine, Carbolic acid. All present. The bottle Pike holds, Evelyn said, is a common bottle. But my supply is all here. It is accounted for. Taza stole nothing from me. Pike's face darkened. He broke into her tent. That is enough. I am not pressing charges, Evelyn said. It does not matter. Pike growled. He is a vagrant and a danger. Evelyn saw he would not be stopped by words. She saw Taza's eyes, wide with terror and a defiant anger. Captain, she said, turning back to her wagon. Since you are here to ensure my safety, please ensure the safety of my property while I document this. I will not have my name used in a false arrest. She did not wait for his permission. She pulled the heavy wooden camera and tripod from the wagon. What in hell are you doing? Pike demanded. My work, Evelyn said. The process was agonizingly slow. She planted the tripod in the street. She attached the camera. The crowd watched, confused. Mercer looked intrigued. Pike looked murderous. She slid a prepared glass plate into the holder. This is ridiculous, Pike said, yanking Taza's arm. Sheriff. Mercer's voice was quiet, but it stopped Pike. Let her proceed. Let us see what the doctor is documenting. Evelyn ducked under the black cloth. The world flipped. She focused on the open trunk, the full bottles, the intact lock. She could see Taza and Pike in the frame, slightly out of focus. She needed this one clear. She emerged, uncapped the lens, and began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The magnesium flash was a blinding white explosion. It lit the street like lightning, freezing every face in a grotesque mask of surprise. The horses reared, and Taza, in that moment of blinding confusion, acted. He stamped his heel hard on Pike's instep. Pike roared in pain, his grip loosening. At the same instant, a shadow detached itself from the alley. Chayton. He did not attack the soldiers. He did not draw a weapon. He moved with a focused, fluid power. He shoved Pike with the full force of his body. The sheriff, already off balance, stumbled backward and fell, with a tremendous splash, into the horse trough outside the saloon. The crowd erupted. Mercer's soldiers raised their rifles, unsure where to aim. Evelyn now, Chayton yelled. He grabbed her arm. He did not wait for the camera. Taza was already sprinting, vanishing into the darkness between the buildings. Chayton pulled Evelyn with him, leaving the camera, the wagon, the tent, and the sputtering sheriff behind. They ran. They did not use the main street, but the spaces behind the buildings, a world of shadows, trash, and broken crates. In less than a minute, they were at the edge of town, where 2 horses and a mule waited, held by the old midwife. Sani. He is safe, Chayton said to her. Sani nodded, handing the reins to Evelyn. Behind them, they heard Pike shouting, A reward, $500 for the Apache, Chayton, and for the woman. They mounted and rode, not east or west, but north, straight toward the forbidding wall of the canyons. They rode for hours, Chayton leading them on a path that was invisible to Evelyn. The wind began to pick up, a low moan that grew into a howl. It was a sandstorm, a wall of red dust that blotted out the stars and stung their skin. They were forced to dismount, to lead the horses, their heads down, their bodies bent against the gale. Just when Evelyn felt her lungs would burst from the grit, Chayton led them into a cleft in the rock. The wind's howl softened. They were in a small, sheltered canyon. And built against its wall was a ramada, a simple shelter of brush and poles. But it was strong, and it was safe. Inside, a small, smokeless fire burned. Taza was there, as was the small boy Evelyn had photographed, and his sick sister. And in the corner sat an old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles. This was Nalin, the elder. Sani, the midwife, immediately went to the sick child, who was coughing weakly. Evelyn, her face caked in red dust, dropped her medical bag and followed. She had lost her wagon. But she had this. She administered a dose of cough syrup and quinine. She felt the child's fevered forehead. That night, the storm raged outside, a living thing of sand and fury. Inside the Ramada, there was a deep quiet. Sani and Evelyn worked together, tending to the sick. Taza sat, quiet, sharpening a piece of wood. Naylin began to speak. She was telling a story, her voice a low chant. Sani translated for Evelyn. She tells of the first people and how they were given this land. She says the earth is our mother, and the rivers are her veins. Chaitin sat near the fire, mending a leather strap. He listened to the old woman. When she finished, the silence returned. Evelyn looked at Chaitin. "Collier, he will not stop. He will send men. He will take the pass." "He thinks the land is dirt," Chaitin said, his voice low. He did not look at her, but at the fire. "He does not see. The Verde Valley is not just a place. It is a blood vessel. It carries the water that is our life. The springs, the river. To cut it is to bleed us. To move us from this land is not like moving a white man from one house to another. It is like taking the heart from the body. We cannot survive." His words settled in the small space. They were not angry. They were a statement of fact, as simple and as hard as the stone that sheltered them. Later, when the wind died down, Evelyn began the task of cleaning her equipment. She had grabbed her camera from the wagon at the last second, though she had left the tripod. She sat by the fire, carefully wiping the fine red dust from the brass lens casing. Nalin, who had been watching her, moved closer. The old woman did not speak English, but she pointed, not at the camera itself, but at the lens. Evelyn held it up. The old woman's finger, thin and brown, traced a small mark on the brass ring. It was a maker's mark, but not a common one. It was a small, etched vortex, a swirl. Naylin began to speak, her voice animated, urgent. She looked at Evelyn, then at Chaitin. Sani knelt beside them. "She knows this mark," Sani translated, her own voice full of wonder. "She says, many, many winters ago, when she was a young woman, a man came. He was not Endi, he was a white man. He carried sticks like yours, and a box that looked at the land." Evelyn felt a strange chill. "A surveyor?" "Yes," Sani said, "Nalin's first son. He fell from the rocks. His arm was broken. The bone was white. The people sang the death song. But the survey man, he came." "He had white man's medicine. He did not let the boy die. He set the bone. He stopped the bleeding. He saved him." Naylin tapped the lens again, then pointed to Evelyn. "She says he marked all his tools with this sign." Sani said, "The sign of the whirlwind. It was his sign." Evelyn's hands were trembling. She put down the lens. She reached for the leather satchel she had tied to her saddle horn, the satchel that held her mother's maps. She pulled one out, the oldest one, the survey of 1849. She unrolled it, and there, in the corner, beside the signature, was the same hand-drawn mark, the whirlwind. "My grandfather," Evelyn whispered. She looked at Naylin. "He was my mother's father. He made this map." Naylin looked at her, and a slow, deep smile spread across her face. She reached out and touched Evelyn's cheek. The connection was made. She was not just a white doctor. She was the granddaughter of the man who had saved Naylin's son. She had a history here, written in the land before she was ever born. The peace of the moment was broken a day later. The storm had passed. A scout, one of Chaitin's cousins, arrived, his horse lathered. "Red Mesa is full of soldiers," he reported. "Collier's there. He is furious. He says the attack on Pike was an act of war. He has given an ultimatum, 10 days. Allende must be out of Coyote Pass and the Verde Valley in 10 days. After that, his men and the soldiers will clear it by force." A wave of fear went through the small camp. 10 days. Evelyn looked at the map in her hands. She looked at Nalin, at Taza. At the sick child, her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "This map," she said, her voice ringing in the canyon. "It is the true law, the survey of 1849. It shows the boundaries of the treaty. Collier's papers are the lie. His ultimatum is illegal." She turned to Chayton. "I am not just a doctor. I am a surveyor's granddaughter. I am going to retrace these lines. I will find the markers my grandfather set. I will use his map and my camera to prove the truth. I will not let them steal this valley." Chayton watched her, his expression unreadable. He had seen her defy Pike. He had seen her save the child. Now he saw this new fire, born of the past. "It is dangerous," he said. "You saw. Collier's men are hunting. Pike wants you, and he wants me." "I am still going," she said. A rare, small smile touched Chayton's mouth. "My uncle, the one your grandfather saved," he said quietly. "He taught me the trails. He taught me where the stone markers are." He stood up. "If you are going, then I will guide you. We will find your grandfather's stones." They left the Ramada before dawn. The small group moved not with the heavy, plodding gait of settlers, but with the light, ground-covering purpose of the end-day. Chayton led, his body seeming to read the landscape as Evelyn read a book. Evelyn followed, her medical bag and camera case secured on her mule. Sani, the old midwife, rode beside her, her knowledge of the land different from Chayton's. She saw medicine in the bushes Evelyn saw only as thorns. Taza, the quick-witted teenager, moved between them, his eyes sharp, his energy boundless. He was an apprentice to them all. Evelyn held her grandfather's map, the survey of 1849, in a protected oilcloth. It was her guide, but Chayton used a different map, one held in his memory, passed down from the uncle whose life Evelyn's grandfather had saved. "The paper shows the line," Chayton said to her as they paused at a dry creek bed. "But it does not show the meaning. Your grandfather saw the line, but my uncle taught him where the water hides." They found the truth together. They followed the dry creek bed for miles, the high canyon walls a deep, burnt orange. They crossed a ridge thick with mesquite, the thorny branches scraping at their clothes. Chayton was looking for a specific landmark mentioned in his uncle's stories, a place the map only marked with a small cross. "A rock that holds a spiral," he said. The sky, which had been a clear, piercing blue, began to change. To the west, a haze appeared, a low brown wall that was not cloud. "Get the animals to the rocks," Chayton ordered. His voice was not alarmed, but it held a new urgency. The wind came first, a low moan that grew into a physical shove. Then the air turned red. The dust storm hit them like a solid thing, a roaring, suffocating blanket of grit. Evelyn was blinded in seconds. She could not see her own hands. The world vanished, replaced by a screaming, abrasive chaos. She pulled her neckerchief over her face, tasting the fine powder on her tongue. She heard the horses whinny in terror. She had lost all direction. She clutched the map, a useless piece of paper in a world without sight. A hand grabbed her arm. It was Chayton. He pulled her down, pushing her against the rough face of a boulder. Sani and Taza were already there, huddled, their backs to the wind. "We must stay," he yelled over the roar. "How long?" Evelyn shouted back. "Until the wind sleeps." They waited for hours. The storm was a timeless agony. Evelyn felt a rising panic. A surveyor's granddaughter lost without her instruments, a doctor useless against the earth itself. Chayton touched her shoulder. He gestured for her to put her hand on the rock face. "Listen," his voice was close to her ear. "Do not fight it. Listen to the earth. The rock is your anchor." She pressed her palm against the stone. She felt the vibration of the wind, a deep thrum that went through her bones. She closed her eyes. She stopped trying to see, and for the first time, she felt the land, She felt the solidness beneath the chaos, the unmoving truth of the stone. The panic recedes. When the wind finally subsided, it was late afternoon. The world was transformed, every surface coated in a fine red powder. They were exhausted, their throats raw. They made a small, cold camp in the shelter of the rocks. Sani and Taza, weary from the ordeal, fell into a deep sleep. Evelyn and Chayton sat by the low, smokeless fire, taking the first watch. The silence of the desert night was profound. "My mother told me about my grandfather," Evelyn said quietly, staring into the low flames. "She said he was a man who believed in true lines. He hated politics, hated the compromises. He came west to draw lines that were real. This map, it was his truth. She died 2 years ago. She never got to see this land. I think I am here for her, as much as for anyone." Chayton was quiet for a long time, feeding small sticks into the fire. "My brother," he said, his voice so low she almost missed it. "He died in the raid at Skeleton Cave. The soldiers trapped us. My brother was a great warrior. He wanted to fight his way out. He took 3 soldiers with him before he fell." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the small flames. His bravery was great, but it did not save the women. It did not save the children who died in that cave. It only brought more anger, more soldiers. That is when I learned. To fight and die is easy. To protect, to keep the people alive, that is the hard path. I will not take a life if I can avoid it. Blood only makes the ground hungry for more blood." Evelyn looked at him, seeing for the first time the deep, abiding sorrow that fueled his discipline. Their bond, forged in the fire of Pike's trap, was tempered now by the shared breath of the storm and the quiet weight of their dead. The next morning, they found the marker. It was exactly where Chayton's memory and Evelyn's map converged, a tall spire of rock, etched with a large, unmistakable spiral. At its base, half buried, was a heavy iron bolt set deep in the stone. Evelyn knelt, her fingers tracing the mark on the bolt head. It was the whirlwind, her grandfather's mark. But her heart sank. The marker had been violated. There were fresh, bright gashes in the stone around the bolt, long, deep gouges from a steel chisel. Someone had tried to dig it out, to destroy it, and beside it, chiseled crudely into the rock, was a new arrow, pointing 3 miles east, toward Collier's land. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant lie. "Collier's men," Chayton said, his voice flat and cold. Evelyn was filled with a white, cold rage. "They are trying to erase the truth." Taza, who had been watching, suddenly pulled a piece of charcoal and a sheet of paper from his pack. He knelt by the rock. He did not say a word. He began to draw, his hand moving with quick, precise strokes. He sketched the rock, the bolt, the ancient whirlwind mark, and the fresh, crude chisel marks of the forgery. A rifle shot cracked through the canyon. A chip of stone exploded from the rock, inches from Taza's hand. Well, look what we found. 4 men, mercenaries, the same men who had tried to rob her, reinforced. They sat on their horses on the ridge above, rifles aimed. "Step away from the rock, doctor," one of them yelled. "Mr. Collier wants that survey mark properly, retired, and he wants the Apache." Chayton moved. He did not reach for a weapon. He grabbed Evelyn's hand and shoved Taza toward the horses, where Sani was already waiting. "Get on right down the wash, do not look back." They scrambled onto their mounts. Another shot kicked up dust at their feet. They plunged down the rocky slope and into the wide, dry riverbed, galloping hard. The mercenaries followed, whooping and firing, their bullets whining off the stones. The wash was a straight, open run, a shooting gallery. They were exposed. "They are too fast," Evelyn yelled. Chayton looked ahead. The wash was wide, but to the left, the bank rose into a dense, pale green thicket. It looked almost soft. He wrenched his horse's head to the left, urging it up the sandy bank. This way, follow me. What is it? Evelyn cried, her horse struggling up the bank. Chola! Sani screamed, her face pale. The horses know the path. Chaitin shouted, Keep your legs in. Trust them. He led them onto a narrow, winding animal trail that snaked through the dense field of cactus. The mercenaries, focused only on the chase, did not see the path. They spurred their horses straight into the thicket at full speed. The result was immediate and horrific. The horses screamed as the jumping chola spines, barbed and vicious, embedded themselves in their legs and chests. One horse reared, throwing its rider. The other men yelled in agony as the spines found their own arms, faces, and legs. It was chaos. The pursuit ended in a writhing, screaming tangle of men, horses, and cactus. Chaitin did not slow down. He led them through the maze and out the other side. They rode for another mile, their hearts pounding, before they finally stopped in a sheltered cove. They were safe. Chaitin's knowledge of the land had saved them, without his firing a single shot. As they caught their breath, they saw a figure stumbling after them. It was one of the mercenaries, the one who had been thrown from his horse. He was covered, truly covered, in chola spines. His face was a mask of blood and thorns. He staggered, fell, and lay whimpering on the ground. Taza picked up a rock. No, Chaitin said. Evelyn was already sliding off her mule, her medical bag in her hand. Evelyn, no, Chaitin said, his voice hard. He would have killed us. He is a man, she said, her voice shaking but firm. And he is my patient. She walked toward the man, who looked at her with terrified, pain-filled eyes. Do not move, she ordered. This will hurt. For the next hour, Chaitin, Taza, and Sani watched as Evelyn Hart knelt in the dust and, with a surgeon's steady hand, meticulously pulled each barbed spine from her enemy's flesh. She cleaned the wounds. She gave him water. Chaitin watched her. He saw her face, grim with concentration, her hands gentle but firm. He saw her unwavering adherence to her own code. She would heal. She would not let the land, or its conflicts, break that promise. He was a man who protected life. He realized, in that moment, that she was, too. When she was finished, they left the man with a canteen and clear instructions. He was too broken to be a threat. We have to go back, Evelyn said as she cleaned her hands. They will be there. Chaitin said, they will be busy with their wounds, and they will expect us to run. They will not expect us to return for the proof. We will go tonight. They waited until the moon was high, a bright silver disk that washed the canyon in pale light. They left Sani and Taza with the horses and crept back on foot. The spiral rock was silent, abandoned. The mercenaries were gone. Evelyn opened her camera case. I lost the tripod in town. She whispered. She began stacking flat rocks, creating a stable platform. Chaitin helped her, his large hands surprisingly steady. She balanced the heavy camera. I need a long exposure, she said. The moonlight is bright, but it is not the sun. Hold still. Do not let your shadow cross the lens. She aimed the camera at the marker, the ancient whirlwind and the fresh chisel marks. She took a deep breath. She uncapped the lens. The silence was absolute. She counted in her head. A full minute. The pale light soaked into the chemical-coated glass plate. She replaced the cap. I have it, she whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion and triumph. It will be grainy. It will be dark, but it will be enough. It will show the truth. They returned to the Ramada as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. Taza, his eyes bright with a new purpose, took the charcoal sketch he had made. I will take this to Red Mesa, he announced. No, Taza, Chaitin said, it is too dangerous. Pike is looking for you, not for me. The boy insisted. I can slip into the fort. I will give this to the soldier. Captain Mercer, I saw his face. His heart is divided. This drawing will break it in two. Before Chayton could argue, Taza was gone, running with the tireless gait of the Enda. In Red Mesa, Captain Mercer sat at his desk, staring at Collier's ultimatum. His conscience was a heavy weight. Then, his sentry brought him a piece of folded paper, found at the gate. He unfolded it. It was Taza's sketch. He stared at the whirlwind, at the clear, angry chisel marks of the forgery. Later that day, his scouts returned, reporting what the surviving mercenaries had said. The woman doctor had not only escaped, but she had treated one of them, and she had been seen, in the dead of night, taking photographs of the boundary marker. The rumors in the saloon changed. The talk was no longer of an Indian lover. The new whisper, spoken with a grudging, fearful respect, was that the woman doctor with the camera knew the law, and that she had proof. Captain Mercer placed Taza's sketch on top of Collier's orders. His choice was no longer simple. It was now a matter of conscience versus complicity. The decision to return to Red Mesa was made with the cold, hard logic of a surgeon. They had the photograph, the map, and the knowledge of the forgery. To hide in the canyons was to concede the truth to Collier's lies. The ultimatum clock was ticking. They had perhaps 8 days left. Evelyn, Sani, and Taza rode back into the settlement in the middle of the day. They did not sneak. They rode straight down the main street, their faces set, their purpose clear. Evelyn's medical bag was strapped to her saddle, and the heavy camera case was balanced in front of Taza. Chayton was not with them. He had moved ahead, a ghost in the alleys, his promise to watch over them hanging in the air. The town went quiet. Men stopped work. Faces appeared in windows. The rumor of the woman doctor who knew the law had spread, but seeing her return, after vanishing with a wanted Apache, was a different matter. It was a challenge. Sheriff Pike met them in front of the fort. He had clearly been waiting. He was not alone. 4 armed deputies fanned out behind him. "Well, Dr. Hart," Pike said, his voice oily with false courtesy. "Come back to turn yourself in aiding a fugitive. Chayton is a hanging offense in this territory." "I am here to see Captain Mercer, Sheriff," Evelyn said, her voice clear and carrying in the silence. She swung down from her horse. "I am here to present evidence of a federal crime." "Evidence?" Pike laughed. "You mean this?" He moved with surprising speed. He lunged past her and grabbed the camera case from Taza's saddle. "This is your evidence." "That is my property," Evelyn protested. "It is evidence." "All right," Pike sneered. "Evidence of your conspiracy with the Apache. I am impounding this, Doctor, for territorial security." He held the box high. "This, and the plate you took, it is all forfeit." He had known. The mercenaries had reported back. He knew exactly what she had photographed. "You cannot do this," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. "I just did." Pike tucked the heavy box under his arm. "Now, you are free to go, Doctor, for now. But I am watching you, and if you so much as speak to another savage, I will have you in my jail, the one you broke Taza out of." He turned and walked away, his deputies following. He did not go to the jail, but to the small, reinforced shed behind his office. It was the town's temporary strong room, where they held confiscated whiskey, mining explosives, and now, her camera. He slammed the metal door, and the sound of the heavy bar dropping into place was a sound of absolute finality. Evelyn stood frozen in the dust. She had risked everything to get the photograph, only to have it stolen from her by the very man it was meant to expose. Captain Mercer had watched the entire exchange from the porch of his office. He had not moved. He had not intervened. When Pike was gone, he simply turned and went back inside. That night, the 4 of them met in the shadows of the livery stable, the air thick with the smell of hay and defeat. Sani, Taza, Evelyn, and Chayton, who had emerged from the darkness. "It is gone," Evelyn whispered, her voice hollow. He has it, the glass plate, all of it. He has a box, Chayton said. His voice was calm. It is locked in the strong room. Taza said, his usual spark gone. There is always a guard. A strong room is just wood and metal. Chayton said, we got Taza out from Pike's jail. This is no different. Chayton, no, Evelyn said. This is not a fight you can win with a staff. That shed is built of railroad ties. And there are guards. You taught me to use evidence, Chayton said, looking at her in the dim light. Your grandfather's map, your photograph, they are our weapons. We cannot leave our weapons in the hands of the enemy. We get it back, tonight. The plan was desperate, born of necessity. Pike's strong room had one weakness, a small, barred window high on the back wall, meant for ventilation. It was too small for a man. But Taza, thin and quick, thought he could fit. The problem was the two guards who sat on the front porch of the office, directly in view of the shed. I will make them look, Taza said, a familiar, reckless grin returning. He pulled a small, carved piece of wood from his pocket, a jaw harp. They will look. He vanished. A few minutes later, a sound began. It was a strange, low, twanging, unearthly sound. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the false fronts of the buildings. It was a sound that scraped at the nerves. The two deputies on the porch stood up, their rifles ready. What in God's name is that? One of them said. The sound stopped, then started again, this time from the direction of the saloon, followed by a loud crash, as if a stack of barrels had toppled over. It is those Apache, the second deputy hissed. Come on! They ran toward the sound, leaving the office and the strong room unguarded. Now, Chayton said. He and Evelyn moved as one. They ran across the dark patch of ground to the back of the shed. Chayton knelt, cupping his hands. He lifted Evelyn, and she began to work on the iron bars of the window. They were set in old, dry wood. Using the heavy blade of a skinning knife Chayton gave her, she began to pry at the rotted edges. It was loud, splintering work. Hurry, Chayton whispered. The wood gave way. She pulled one bar free, then the second. The opening was just big enough. Chayton lifted Taza, who had run back from his diversion, and pushed him through the opening. They heard him land inside. Seconds passed. It felt like an eternity. Evelyn was holding her breath. Why are you doing this? She whispered to Chayton, her back pressed against the rough wood. Risking your life for my photograph. It is not your photograph, Chayton replied, his voice a low breath in the dark. It is the land's voice. It is the truth. The white man only listens to paper and pictures, so we will give him pictures. He looked at her, his face inches from hers in the shadows. What do you want? Evelyn, you are a doctor. You could be safe in the East. Why are you here, in this shed, hunted by Pike? I came to heal, she said, her voice trembling. But I see now. You cannot heal a wound if the knife is still in it. Collier is the knife, Pike is the knife. I want the truth to matter. I want my grandfather's work to mean something. She looked at him. What do you want? Chayton, truly. He was silent for a moment. He was not looking at her, but past her, at the land he could feel in the darkness. For the land to be respected, he said, his voice raw. For my people to live in peace, to see one generation of our children grow up who are not hunted. That is all. A noise from inside. Taza's head appeared in the window. He was pushing the heavy camera case. I have it. Chayton took it. Go! He hissed at Taza, who scrambled out and ran for the shadows. We are seen, one of the deputies yelled from the street. They had been fooled by the first noise, but now they were running back. A rifle shot cracked. The bullet splintered the wood of the shed, centimeters from Evelyn's head. Chayton did not hesitate. He grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulling her with him as he ran. He did not run for the horses. He ran for the deepest, darkest alley, the camera case held tight in his other hand. They spent the rest of the night hidden in the cellar of the abandoned tannery, the air thick with the chemical stench of old hides. But they had the camera. More importantly, they had the lightproof box inside, holding the single, precious glass plate. As dawn broke, Taza appeared. He had not been idle. "I met the soldier," he said, handing Evelyn a folded piece of paper. "The one, Mercer. He said to give this to you. He said his conscience is his own." Evelyn unfolded the paper. It was not a military order. It was a handwritten letter, stained with what looked like whiskey. The handwriting was bold and arrogant. It read, "Mr. Thompson, per our discussion, the sum of $500 in gold coin will be transferred upon your correction of the survey markers at Coyote Pass. The current line is inconvenient. The new line must reflect progress. H. Collier." Evelyn stared at it. It was the missing piece. The photograph proved the forgery. This letter proved why. It was Collier's own hand, bribing the new territorial surveyor. "He gave this to you," Evelyn said, stunned. "Mercer, he is a man caught in a trap," Chayton said, "like us." The sky outside was turning a sick, greenish purple. The air was heavy, hot, and wet. The silence of the morning was broken by a low, distant rumble. "A summer storm," Sani said, joining them in the cellar. "A great one." "It is a sign," Taza said. "It is a problem," Evelyn said, thinking. "We have the proof, the plate, the letter, the map. But who do we give it to? Mercer is afraid. Pike will burn it. If we send it east, it will be too late. Collier's 10 days are almost gone." The first fat drops of rain began to fall, sounding like drumbeats on the cellar door. A jagged fork of lightning split the sky, followed by a crash of thunder that shook the building. "We cannot give it to one man," Chayton said. "We must give it to all of them." Evelyn looked at him. "A meeting, a public meeting." "Where?" Sani asked. "Pike's men will be waiting." "The church," Evelyn said, the idea forming, sudden and clear. "The small wooden church. It is neutral ground. We will call everyone, the settlers, the miners, the soldiers, and your people, Chayton. We will present the evidence to all of Red Mesa at once." It was a terrifying gamble. Chayton would be walking into a town that had a $500 bounty on his head. "They will not listen to me," Evelyn said. "They see me as an outsider, a lover of the ND, and they will not listen to my paper. They must hear it from you. You must be the one to speak. Chayton." He looked at the map, at the letter, at the camera case. He, a warrior, was being asked to fight with papers and words, in the language of his enemy. "I will speak," he said. The night before the meeting, the storm raged. They found shelter in the Ramada, which Chayton and Taza had reinforced. Evelyn lit a single lantern. She had developed the plate. It was beautiful, grainy, ethereal, but absolutely clear. The whirlwind mark, the crude, fresh chisel gouges, the lie, captured in moonlight. She laid the evidence on a blanket, her grandfather's map, Collier's letter, and the glass photograph. "You cannot speak with anger," she coached Chayton. "They expect that. They want it. It gives them the excuse to pull their triggers. You must speak like a doctor, like a surveyor. Here is the land, here is the wound, here is the proof." He held the photograph in his hand. "They will not listen." "You must make them listen," she said. "Tell them what you told me, about the blood vessel, about the heart, that it is not just dirt, it is life." He nodded, his face grim. Just then, one of the young Endet scouts slipped into the shelter, his body soaked, his face urgent. "I was in Red Mesa," he said, breathing hard. "The meeting is set. Everyone will be there. Collier's men, the miners. But Pike, he is moving his men. He is putting deputies in the windows of the saloon, in the feed store. They all have rifles. They are not there to keep the peace. Chayton, they are there for you. He knows you will speak. It is a trap." The scout's words fell into the small, cramped shelter and seemed to suck the air out of it. It is a trap. Outside, the summer storm had broken its patience. The rain was not a drizzle. It was a solid wall of water, a deluge that turned the dry arroyos into roaring, muddy rivers. Thunder cracked overhead, a sound like the mountains splitting apart. Inside the ramada, the single kerosene lamp guttered, its flame a small, panicked yellow heart. The shelter, made of brush and poles, was holding, but water dripped through in a dozen places. Sani, the old midwife, closed her eyes, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Taza, his face soaked from his run, clenched his fists. "He will murder us," the boy hissed. "Pike will not let Chayton speak. He will have his men shoot him for the bounty." Chayton said nothing. He sat on his heels, his gaze fixed on the evidence laid out on the blanket, the brittle map, Collier's damning letter, and the heavy glass plate of the photograph. He was a man carved from the stone of the canyon, his stillness an anchor in the chaos. Evelyn Hart watched him. She was exhausted, her body humming with a fear so deep it had become a vibration. The last few days had stripped her raw. The chase, the storm, the hurried, desperate work in the tannery cellar to develop the precious plate. Now this, a public meeting that was, in fact, an execution. "He expects you to run," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but clear over the drumming rain. "Or he expects you to fight. He wants you to give him an excuse. He wants a battle." Chayton finally looked up. His eyes met hers in the flickering light. "I will not run, and I will not fight him." "Then you will die," Sani said, her voice flat with grief. "He will go," Evelyn said, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. She knew him. "He will go, and he will speak, and they will try to kill him." Chayton gave the scout a quiet order. He and Taza were to go to the other shelters, to warn the families, to make sure the elders and children were safe from the flooding. They were not to come to the church. The trap was for him, and he would not lead his people into it. Taza argued, his voice hot, but Chayton's command was absolute. The boy finally left. His shoulders slumped in a mixture of fury and fear. Sani, too, eventually rose. The sick child in the adjoining shelter was frightened by the storm. She went to tend to her, leaving Evelyn and Chayton alone in the small, leaking space. The storm was a living thing, a presence in the ramada with them. The lantern flame cast huge, dancing shadows. Evelyn sat on a dry stack of blankets. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was shaking, not from cold, but from a weariness that went to the bone. Chayton was cleaning his rifle. He did this with a slow, methodical patience. He checked the mechanism, oiled it, and then, to her surprise, he set it against the wall. He would not be taking it. He picked up the heavy, fire-hardened staff he had used to disable the mercenaries. That, she understood, was a part of him. He was going to walk into a room of rifles carrying only a stick. The weight of it all, the sheer impossibility, broke something inside her. This man, who had moved like a shadow, who had spoken of the land as if it were his own blood, was going to sacrifice himself for a photograph and a piece of paper, for her grandfather's truth. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, almost lost in the roar of the rain. "Chayton!" He stopped his work, his hands resting on the smooth wood of the staff. He waited. She was a doctor, a woman of science and fact. She had no time for hysterics, but her hands were trembling, and her throat was tight. "Tomorrow," she said, "we are walking into that church, into Pike's trap. We may not walk out. We may not live to see the afternoon." He continued to watch her, his gaze steady, patient. "I have to know." Her composure, the wall she had built around herself, finally crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. What we have done. What this is between us. She took a shaky breath. I am not a girl, Chayton. I am a woman. I know what I feel. But I do not know you. Not really, and I have to ask. She met his dark eyes. Do you love me, or do you just want me? The question hung in the small, damp shelter. It was the rawest, most honest thing she had ever said. It was a plea for a single truth in a world of lies. He looked at her for a long, long time. The sound of the rain filled the silence. The lantern flame dipped and flared. He was seeing her, not as the doctor, not as the surveyor's granddaughter, but as the woman trembling in the storm, asking for her life to have one final, clear meaning. A small, slow smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was not a smile of humor, but of a deep, settled recognition. It was the saddest, most beautiful smile she had ever seen. He moved, sitting on the blanket opposite her. He spoke quietly, his voice a low vibration that cut through the noise of the storm. After our first night, he said, no difference. Evelyn closed her eyes. The tears slipped free. It was not the answer she had expected, not the poetry of the East. It was his truth. It was a statement of fact. It was an admission that the desperation and the desire, the respect and the need, the shared fear in the tannery cellar and the quiet comfort in this shelter. It had all merged. The physical and the spiritual were one. It was not a base wanting. It was a profound belonging. He was telling her that for him, the two were now the same. The question was irrelevant, because the answer was yes to both. He reached into the small leather pouch at his belt. His movements were deliberate. He took her hand. Her skin was cold, stained with the chemicals she had used to develop the plate. His hand was calloused, dry, and intensely warm. He pressed something small and cool into her palm. She opened her eyes and looked down. It was a thin, flat strip of turquoise, a brilliant, piercing blue, like a piece of the sky trapped in stone. For you, he said, to remember, the water in the stone. She stared at it. The symbol of the nda of life, of hope in the dry, hard land, a promise. She closed her hand around it, the stone warming to her skin. Her shaking stopped. A new kind of strength, cold and clear, moved through her. We will face them tomorrow, she said, her voice steady now. We will face them, he confirmed. The fear was not gone, but it was no longer in charge. This bond between them, this love that had no name. It was now the reason. It was no longer a secret, hidden in shadows. It was the motive, clear as the turquoise in her hand. Miles away, at the fort, Captain Mercer stood on the covered porch of his office, staring into the black, churning wall of the storm. He had not slept. He had given Evelyn the letter, a clear act of insubordination, perhaps treason. His career was over, one way or another. He was a man caught between his uniform and his conscience. Pike was a brute. Collier was a thief. And the Apache, they were simply people, trying to live on the land that was theirs, armed with a 30-year-old map. His eyes, accustomed to the dark, caught a movement. A figure, small and soaked, slipped out of the livery stable. Mercer recognized the quick, light steps. It was the boy, Taza. He was carrying a covered basket, moving toward the canyon. Mercer did not call the guard. He did not follow. He was not a spy. Not tonight. He watched the boy go. He knew where the Ramada was. His scouts had mapped it. He stood there for a long time, the wind and rain lashing at his face. He was too far to see anything clearly, just the faintest glow of the lantern, a single point of warmth in the vast, violent dark. He saw Taza arrive, saw him slip inside. He saw the silhouettes move. He saw two figures, Chayton and the doctor. working together. He saw a moment, just a flicker in the lamplight, of Chayton's hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder. A simple gesture, partnership. Mercer turned away, a knot tightening in his gut. He was protecting a railroad that would destroy that. He was hunting a man who was clearly protecting his own. He was on the wrong side of the line. He went inside his office. The image of those two shadows in the storm burned into his mind. His choice was made. The storm broke just before dawn. The world was washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet sage and creosote, the smell of the desert drinking. Inside the Ramada, Evelyn had not slept. After Chayton had held her hand, after their commitment had been sealed, she had turned to her work. The fear had been channeled into a fierce, focused energy. She had the single, precious glass plate negative. She needed prints. She needed evidence she could hold, evidence she could distribute. In the corner of the shelter, she had created a makeshift dark room, with Sani's help, holding a blanket to shield the paper from the direct lantern flame. She worked all night. It was painstaking, primitive work. She used the printing out paper, exposing it to the lamp, judging the time by instinct. Her hands immersed in the developer, the stop, the fixer. The sharp, vinegary smell of the chemicals filled the small space. Chayton had watched her, astounded by this white magic, this ability to trap a moment and multiply it. As the first gray light of morning entered the Ramada, Evelyn was carefully rinsing the final prints in a bucket of clean rainwater. She laid them out on a dry blanket. 3 perfect, damning prints of the boundary marker. The moonlight had given them a ghostly, ethereal quality, but the evidence was undeniable. The ancient whirlwind survey mark, the fresh, crude chisel gouges of the forgery. She had made one more. She held it up, the chemicals still damp. It was the photograph she had taken on her first day. The smiling Apache child. She placed it beside the print of the defaced marker. The lie on the stone, the truth in a child's face. "This," she said to Chayton, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "This is our testimony, the land and the people. This is what we will show them." He picked up the print of the smiling boy. He looked at it, then at her. He nodded. It was time. The church was not a large building. It was made of raw pine planks, smelling of sap and the wet dust from the storm. It was meant to hold 50 souls, perhaps 60. On this morning, it held over 100. The air was hot and thick, tasting of wet wool, stale sweat, and an overpowering, metallic fear. The miners and railroad laborers, men loyal to Harlan Collier's wages, packed the benches on the right. Their faces were hard, suspicious. The settlers, the shopkeepers, and their wives. People caught in the middle, filled the back. On the left sat Nalin, Sani, and a small, brave delegation of ND elders who had trusted Chayton with their lives. At the front, standing by the simple altar, was Captain Mercer. He had positioned his 6 soldiers along the walls, their rifles held at ease, but their presence a clear blue line of authority. Sheriff Pike stood near the door, his arms crossed, a smug, confident look on his face. He watched the front, waiting. Evelyn knew his deputies were outside, in the windows of the saloon, waiting for the signal. The room went utterly silent when Evelyn Hart and Chayton walked down the central aisle. Evelyn carried her grandfather's leather satchel. Chayton, wearing a simple linen shirt, carried nothing but his walking staff. He had a $500 bounty on his head, and he was walking into a room full of armed men. He moved with a calm that was more unnerving than any threat. Evelyn did not step up to the pulpit. She stood on the floor, level with the people. She placed the satchel on the altar table and took a breath. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Hart," she began. Her voice was clear, the voice of a physician, steady and factual. "I came to Red Mesa to open an aid station. I came to heal, but I cannot heal a community that is being poisoned by a lie, and I am here to show you the truth." She unrolled the map first, laying it flat. "This is the original survey of 1849, signed by my grandfather. You can see his mark here." She pointed to the small, inked whirlwind. A murmur went through the room. "For the past days," she continued, "Mr. Collier and Sheriff Pike have told you that the Apache are violating the treaty lines, that they are squatting on railroad land. That is the lie." She reached into the satchel and pulled out the first photograph. She held it high. The print was large, the image stark in the gray morning light filtering through the windows. "This," she said, "is the boundary marker at Coyote Pass, as my grandfather set it 30 years ago. Here is his mark, the whirlwind, set in an iron bolt." She then held up the second photograph. "And this is that same marker as it stands today, photographed 3 nights ago, by moonlight." The image was sharp, the crude, fresh chisel marks, the forged arrow pointing east. The silence broke. The miners on the right looked confused, angry. They had been told one thing, they were seeing another. "This is a forgery," Evelyn said, her voice rising. "A common, criminal forgery, meant to steal thousands of acres of land that belongs to the ND." "That is a trick," a man yelled from the back. "A picture, it proves nothing." "I am a woman of science," Evelyn said. "A photograph does not lie. This is the truth, captured in silver and light, but it is not the only truth." She held up the third photograph, the one she had taken on her first day, the smiling Apache child. "This is the other truth," she said, her voice softening, breaking with a controlled passion. "This is who lives on that land. They are not savages. They are not shadows. They are families. They are children who laugh in the sun. They are human beings. And they are being moved off their land by force, based on a crime." She turned to Chayton. He stepped forward. The tension in the room became a physical thing. Every man who owned a gun thought of the $500. Pike uncrossed his arms, his hand drifting to the butt of his revolver. Chayton looked at the miners. He looked at the settlers. He did not speak with the fire of a warrior. He spoke, as Evelyn had asked, with the quiet authority of the land itself. "My name is Chayton," he said. His English was simple, direct. "Dr. Hart has shown you the white man's truth, the paper, the picture. I will tell you ours." He paused, letting them listen. "You look at the Verde Valley. You see rock. You see dirt. You see a place for your iron road. We see our relative. This land is not a thing to be owned. It is our family." He held his hands open. "The springs in the pass, they are the heart, the rivers that flow from them. They are the blood vessels. This is the truth. For 1,000 years, my people have lived because this blood flows." His voice grew stronger, filling the small church. "Mr. Collier's plan is not just to move us. He plans to blast the springs, to turn the river for his railroad. He is not moving a people. He is cutting the main artery of our mother. He is tearing the heart from the body. We cannot live without our heart. You would not ask a white man to live without his heart. We will not leave." The room was stunned. He had not threatened them. He had explained them. He had made his people's struggle a matter of simple, physical survival. Before anyone could react, Captain Mercer stepped forward. His face was pale, his jaw set. "Dr. Hart is correct," Mercer announced, his voice ringing with military command. "And Chayton is correct. The treaty line has been criminally altered." He looked directly at the miners. "And I have proof of who ordered it." He reached into his tunic and produced the single, folded piece of paper, Collier's letter. He did not read it. He simply slapped it down on the altar, on top of the map. "A letter," Mercer said, "from Harlan Collier, offering a bribe of $500 to the territorial surveyor to correct the line. He paid to have the map forged. He paid to have the land stolen. He has been lying to you. And he has been using the United States Army to enforce his crime. This time, The room exploded. It was not just murmurs. It was a roar. The miners, who hated the railroad bosses as much as they feared the Apache, felt a surge of betrayal. They stood up, shouting, "He lied to us! He used us!" This was the chaos Sheriff Pike had been waiting for. But it was the wrong kind of chaos. It was turning against Collier. Against him. He had to act. "He's inciting a riot," Pike bellowed, pulling his heavy Colt revolver. He shoved a settler aside and grabbed Chayton by the shirt. "You are under arrest. Apache for murder, for theft." He is resisting. He aimed the revolver not at Chayton's chest, but at his head. He was going to execute him, right here, and claim the bounty. He was going to silence the truth. But Taza, positioned near the back wall, had been watching Pike, not Chayton. He had seen the sheriff's hand move to his gun. He did not shout. He did not run. He grabbed the thick, worn bell rope. With all his strength, he pulled. A single, massive clang shattered the air. Pike froze. Everyone froze. Taza pulled again. Clang and again. Clang, clang, clang. It was the alarm bell, the sound for a fire, or an attack. In seconds, the church doors burst open. The rest of the town? The shopkeepers, the blacksmith, the women who had been too afraid to come, the off-duty soldiers from the fort, they all came running. They flooded into the church, their eyes wide, demanding to know what was wrong. They found a scene frozen in time. The entire community, packed into the church, staring at their sheriff, who held a drawn revolver to the head of an unarmed Apache man, in front of a United States Army captain. Pike was trapped. His plan required a few chaotic witnesses. He now had the entire town, dozens of eyes, all focused on his gun. He had lost control. Captain Mercer seized the moment. He drew his own service revolver, the metal clicking as he cocked the hammer. He did not aim it at Chayton. He aimed it directly at Sheriff Pike. "Sheriff," Mercer's voice was like ice, "you will release that man. You are attempting to incite violence and commit murder in a public assembly. You are using the color of your office to enforce a known fraud. In the name of the United States Army and the territorial governor, you are relieved of your duty." Pike's face contorted, a mask of disbelief and rage. He was surrounded. "Soldiers," Mercer commanded. "Detain this man." Two of his soldiers moved, their bayonets fixed. They grabbed Pike's arms. He struggled for a second, then went limp, his eyes burning with hatred. They wrenched the gun from his hand. "You will hang for this, Mercer." Pike spat as they bound his hands. A wave of relief, of stunned disbelief, went through the church. Evelyn felt her knees buckle. They had done it. They had told the truth, and the law had, for once, listened. The sound of a slow, deliberate applause came from the open doorway. A man sat on a large bay horse just outside the church. He was dressed in a fine Eastern suit, his hat clean. He was flanked by 10 men, mercenaries, the same men from the canyon, all heavily armed. Harlan Collier. He had surrounded the church. A truly inspiring performance. "Captain," Collier said, his voice calm, projecting into the building. "Arresting a town official, protecting a fugitive, siding with savages against the United States government's contract for progress. That is a very complex word you have chosen. Mutiny. I believe." The crowd in the church, which had been a collection of factions, suddenly became one. They were trapped. The miners, the settlers, the ND, the soldiers. They were all in the church together, and Collier's private army was outside. Taza, his face pale but resolute, walked back to the bell rope. He looked at Chayton. He looked at Evelyn. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to ring the bell. Clang. A long pause. Clang. It was not an alarm. It was a statement. The community of Red Mesa was in the church, and they would not be silent. The slow, deliberate clang of the church bell cut through the tense air, a defiant answer to the men in rifles surrounding the building. Harlan Collier, his face impassive, watched as Taza pulled the rope again. Clang! It was a sound of community, a sound Collier despised. He had lost the room. He had lost the law. Mercer's mutiny and Evelyn's proof had turned the town against him. His authority, built on paper and bribes, had dissolved. All he had left was power. Mr. Collier, Mercer shouted from the church doorway. You are surrounded. My men from the fort will be here. Disarm your mercenaries. Collier gave a small, cold laugh. Your men. Captain, you are a traitor to your uniform. And you, he sneered at the church, are trespassing on property of the Red Mesa Railroad. He turned to the mercenary beside him, a man with a scarred face. This meeting is over. Show them the true power in this valley. Light the charge. Now. The man looked surprised. Sir, the pass with the rain. I gave you an order, Collier said, his voice dropping to a silken threat. Or perhaps you would rather I not pay you at all. Light it. The man turned his horse and galloped away, disappearing toward the high V-shaped notch of Coyote Pass. Inside the church, the people looked at each other, confused. What charge? A miner asked. Chayton knew. His face went pale. The springs, he whispered to Evelyn. He is going to blast the springs. He is going to prove he owns the water. They waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from the church roof. Taza held the bell rope, his knuckles white. The explosion was not just a sound. It was a concussion that punched the air from their lungs. It was a deep, guttural whump that seemed to come from the center of the earth. The church windows rattled, and a collective scream rose from the crowd. Collier smiled. It was done. He had made his point. But the earth was not finished speaking. After the explosion's echo died, a new sound began. It was not the rumble of thunder. It was a low, steady, grinding roar. It was the sound of 1,000,000 tons of wet earth, loosened by the night of rain and triggered by Collier's dynamite. Letting go. Chayton was the first to realize. He grabbed Evelyn, his eyes wide with a new terror. The flood, he yelled. The pass! He broke the walls! The sound grew, the roar of an approaching train, the sound of the mountain coming down. It hit the town like a fist. A 10-foot wall of red-brown water, thick as slurry, filled with shattered trees, mining debris, and boulders, burst from the arroyo that served as Red Mesa's main street. The town, built on a convenient, flat floodplain, had never stood a chance. Collier's mercenaries. Their horses pointed at the church, were hit from the side. They did not have time to turn. The wall of mud and water struck them, sweeping horses and men away in a churning, screaming tangle. The front of the saloon imploded, its false front collapsing into the torrent. Collier's own horse reared in terror. He fought the animal, trying to turn it toward the high ground of the slope behind him. Inside the church, panic erupted. People screamed, trampling each other to get away from the doors, away from the water that was now pouring across the floor. Calm, Mercer roared, his voice cutting through the panic. The church is on higher ground. We are safe for the moment. But they watched in horror as their town was erased. Wagons were swept away like toys. The feed store dissolved, and Evelyn's original aid station, the heavy wagon she had left behind, was lifted, spun, and then crushed against the wall of the livery stable. In the chaos, the two soldiers holding the bound Sheriff Pike were knocked aside. Pike saw his chance. He was not going to drown in a church. He charged for the back door, crashing it open. He would make it to the slope, to freedom. He ran into the open, just as a secondary surge, a wave from a collapsed holding pond, roared around the side of the building. The water hit him. He was swept from his feet, his scream lost in the roar, and he vanished into the red, churning water. The main flood wave passed, but the street was now a raging river, 4 feet deep. Collier was stranded. His horse, in its panic, had scrambled onto the stone foundation of the ruined blacksmith shop. He was alive, but he was trapped, a king on a small, crumbling island, his private army gone. The immediate threat had passed, but the church was an island in a sea of destruction, and there were survivors. A man was clinging to the roof of the general store. 2 women were trapped in the upper window of the ruined saloon. The divisions of the morning were gone. There were no miners, no settlers, no end day. There were only the living and the drowning. "We need a rope," Mercer yelled. "A line to the livery. It is the strongest building." Chayton was already moving. He ran to the bell tower, emerging a moment later with the long, thick bell rope Taza had been pulling. "This will hold," he said. He, Mercer, and 2 of the miners, men who had been shouting for his death an hour before, tied one end to the church's main beam. Chayton knotted the other end around his waist. He did not hesitate. He plunged into the cold, fast-moving water. He was a strong swimmer, and he fought the current, the rope his only anchor. He made it to the livery, securing the line. "A rescue line," Evelyn shouted. "We can get people across." She saw her medical wagon, pinned against the livery wall. "The supplies." She followed Chayton's path, using the rope, her hands raw. Sani, the old midwife, was right behind her. Together, they began pulling smashed crates of medicine from the wreckage. "Bring the wounded to the church," Sani directed, her voice the calm center of the storm. "We will make a hospital." Evelyn, Chayton, and Mercer worked as a team. The soldiers and the ND elders formed a human chain, passing the injured, the women, the children, along the rope line, from the flooded buildings to the safety of the church. They watched as one of Collier's mercenaries, a man Evelyn recognized from the attack in the canyon, was swept down the current. He was drowning, his arms flailing. He was being carried directly toward Harlan Collier, who was still clinging to his rocky perch, watching, his face a mask of disbelief. The current was also carrying the man toward Chayton. Chayton had a choice. He was holding the rope for a family. He could let the mercenary pass, let him drown. He could save Collier, the man who had tried to destroy him. Instead, Chayton looped the rope around his arm, securing the family's passage. Then he lunged, bracing himself, and caught the arm of the drowning mercenary. The man was heavy, and the current tried to pull them both under. "A pull," Chayton roared. The miners on the rope, his rope, hauled, and Chayton dragged the sputtering, terrified man to safety. He shoved him toward the church. He turned. The water was still rising around Collier. "He is next," Mercer said, his face grim. Chayton looked at the man who had offered $500 for his life. "Save the life first," he said to Mercer, his voice flat. "Justice later." He coiled a loose end of the rope. His throw was perfect. The loop landed around Collier's chest. "Hold on!" Chayton yelled. They pulled Harlan Collier, the railroad baron, the man of power, through the mud, like a drowned rat. They deposited him, coughing and defeated, on the floor of the church. The entire town, white and in day, watched in silence. They had seen the truth. They had seen a man live his principles, saving the very enemy who had none. The roar of the flood began to subside. The water level dropped, leaving a thick, steaming coat of red mud on everything. The crisis was passing. And then they heard the new sound. It was the sound of hooves, many hooves, coming from the high ground. A full company of military police, their blue uniforms clean, their sabers rattling, rode into the devastated town. They were led by a major, a man with a hard face, who stared in disbelief at the scene. Captain Mercer, covered in mud, his uniform torn, saluted. "Major, thank God. My message got through." "Captain Mercer," the major said, his eyes taking in the bound Pike, who was being pulled, alive, from a tangle of debris downstream. He saw the soaked, humiliated Collier. He saw the mixed community of survivors. "Your message was dramatic. I see it was also an understatement. Report. Mercer stood tall. Sir, I have detained Harlan Collier for conspiracy, bribery, and the intentional destruction of this valley, which caused this flood. I have also detained Sheriff Pike for complicity and attempted murder. He gestured to the church, to the townspeople. We would not have survived without the end of this man. He pointed to Chayton. This man, Chayton, saved us. He saved all of us. The major looked at Collier. He looked at Chayton. He looked at the miners and the settlers, who were nodding in agreement, their faces grim. Mr. Collier, the major said, his voice cold. You are under arrest by the United States Army. Two soldiers dismounted, pulling heavy iron cuffs from their saddles. Collier, his face white, his power evaporated, put his hands out. The click of the cuffs was the only sound in the ruined town. The townspeople did not cheer. They just watched. They had seen the photograph of the forgery. But now, they had seen with their own eyes. They had been saved by the people they had been paid to hate. The truth was no longer on paper. It was in the mud, on their hands, and in their hearts. The world, scoured and remade by the flood, smelled of red mud and bruised sage. The sun that rose was unforgiving, baking the thick slurry that covered Red Mesa, turning the ruined town into a steaming ochre graveyard. The roar of the water had been replaced by the rhythmic scrape of shovels, the low commands of the military police, and the quiet, exhausted weeping of survivors. The church, standing on its slightly higher ground, had become the town's hospital, morgue, and shelter. Sanny and Evelyn Hart worked side by side, their differences erased by the sheer, overwhelming need. They set bones, stitched wounds, and delivered a baby in the dusty choir loft, all while the armed soldiers stood guard over the prisoners. Harlan Collier and the mud-caked, sputtering Sheriff Pike were kept under heavy guard in the flooded, ruined jail, their hands bound. Their power had evaporated with the morning mist. 2 days later, the territorial commissioner arrived. He was a thin man from Prescott, wearing a suit that was visibly offended by the mud. He arrived with a military escort, his face a mask of bureaucratic dismay. He was not a savior. He was an administrator, and this was the messiest file he had ever been handed. The major of the military police, who had kept order since the flood, officially deferred to him. A field hearing was convened in the largest of the army tents. It was hot, and the air smelled of canvas and drying mud. The commissioner sat at a folding table. Evelyn was called first. Chayton, no longer a fugitive but a witness, sat beside her. Nayland and the elders sat behind them. On the other side sat Collier and Pike, shackled and guarded. Evelyn placed her evidence on the table. The brittle, water-stained survey of 1849, the glass plate negative, which she had protected with her life, the 3 clear photographs of the forged boundary marker, the photograph of the smiling Ende child, and finally, Collier's handwritten letter, which Mercer had provided. "This is the map, sir," Evelyn said, her voice hoarse. "This is the forgery, and this," she tapped the letter, "is the confession." The commissioner read the letter, his lips tightening. He looked at the photograph of the child, then at the photograph of the forgery. He did not need to deliberate. He turned to Captain Mercer, who stood at attention, his uniform stained, his face grim. "Captain, your testimony." Mercer did not make excuses. He did not plead his case. He simply stated the truth. "Sir, I was given orders to support the railroad's contract," Mercer said, his voice clear. "I did so, even when I began to suspect that the contract was based on fraud. I chose my orders over my conscience. I failed to protect the law, and I failed to protect these citizens, both white and ND." He looked at Collier with cold clarity. "The evidence Dr. Hart presented is accurate. I gave her the letter, which I found in Mr. Collier's confiscated effects. I did so because I knew he intended to silence her and Chayton, to cover his crimes." Mercer took a deep breath. The flood was an act of nature, sir, but the dynamite that triggered it was an act of malice, ordered by that man. I have 6 soldiers who heard the order. My negligence in not stopping him sooner makes me morally complicit. Therefore, I must respectfully tender my resignation from the United States Army." The commissioner stared at him. He nodded once, accepting the weight of the sacrifice. "Your testimony is noted. Captain, your resignation will be considered." He turned his gaze to the prisoners. "Harlan Collier, you will be transported to the federal prison in Prescott to await trial. The charges are numerous bribery of a federal official, conspiracy to defraud the government, multiple counts of attempted murder, and willful endangerment resulting in the catastrophic loss of life and property in this valley." Collier, his fine suit caked in mud, said nothing. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed silence. "Sheriff Pike," the commissioner continued, "you are stripped of your office. You will stand trial for conspiracy, attempted murder, and gross abuse of power. Get them out of my sight." The soldiers hauled the 2 men to their feet and marched them out of the tent, toward a waiting prison wagon. The town watched them go, not with cheers, but with a bone-deep, weary silence. The reckoning had come. When the tent was quiet, the commissioner looked at Nalin and Chaitin. "The Coyote Pass Railroad project is suspended indefinitely. The treaty lines of the survey of 1849 are, as of this moment, the only recognized boundary. The valley is yours." It was a total victory, but it felt thin in the face of the destruction. Nalin, the old woman, stood up. Sani stood beside her to translate. Nalin did not speak of victory. She spoke of the mud. "The water came," Sani translated, her voice soft. "It washed away the bad, but it also washed away the houses. The lines on the map are true, but we must live on the land. The mud is new. We must all put our hands in it." She looked at the commissioner, then at Evelyn. "The NDE do not want the town gone. We want the hate gone. We propose a new line, a cultural buffer zone, following the new path of the water. In this zone, we will build a true meeting place." She pointed to where Evelyn's wagon had been crushed. "The doctor's aid station. We will rebuild it. Larger. For all. We will build a school. For Anda children and white children. To learn both languages. And we will build a market, where we trade. And no man's greed can set the price." The commissioner, a man of paper, was stunned by the simple, profound practicality. "The territory will support this," he said, humbled. Evelyn, who had come to Red Mesa as a traveler, knew she had arrived. "I will run the aid station," she said, "and the school." She looked at her camera, which Chaitin had saved from the flood. "But I'm also opening a photo room. It will be a place for medical records, so I can track the health of the children. It will be a place for land records." She glanced at the map. "So this never happens again, and it will be a place for stories, to remember what happened here, the truth." Later, as the army began to withdraw, leaving Mercer behind to oversee the transition to a new territorial marshal, Chaitin gathered the young men, including Taza. He saw the anger still in them, the adrenaline of the fight. He knew that anger had to be channeled, or it would fester. "The fight with rifles is over," he told them, his hand resting on Taza's shoulder. "The fight with shovels has begun, and a new fight. We are not ghosts of the canyon anymore. This is our land, and we must be its guides." He began to teach them what his uncle had taught him, not just how to fight, but how to see, how to track, not for war, but for guidance, how to read the clouds, how to find the water, how to move through the cholla field without harm. "Travelers will come," he said. "Good men. We will be the ones to lead them. We will show them the land. We will teach them to respect it. This is the new warrior's path, not to kill, but to guide." Weeks passed. The mud turned to hard-packed earth. The skeletons of new buildings rose from the ruins of the old. The Ramada was the first thing rebuilt. A long, open-air structure that served as Evelyn's clinic, a schoolroom, and a town hall. One evening, as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, the survivors gathered. It was not a celebration. It was a thanksgiving. Nayland lit a bundle of sage, the sharp, clean smoke rising in the cooling air, a blessing on the new wood. Sani and the other women, White and Ndi, brought what food they had: smoked venison, dried beans, and stacks of warm cornbread. There was no formal speech. An old miner, a man who had lost his home, brought out a fiddle, and the Enda began to sing, a low, quiet chant of gratitude for the rain, for the survival, for the earth. Evelyn stood apart, watching. She felt a hand, calloused and warm. Take hers. It was Chayton. They did not speak. They walked away from the quiet gathering, climbing the low mesa that overlooked the valley. The devastation was still visible, a raw red scar. But the flood, fed by the blasted springs, had changed the land. The Verde Valley was greener than she had ever seen it. Small streams, diverted by the blast, now ran where there had been only dry arroyos. The air was cool. She looked at Chayton. He was not a warrior tonight. He was just a man. He was the man who had seen her, all of her, in the storm. She touched the strip of turquoise he had given her, which she now wore on a simple leather cord. "The water in the stone?" she whispered, understanding the promise. He looked out at the valley, at the new, improbable green spreading in the dusk. He squeezed her hand. "The water's in the stone," he agreed. They stood together, two survivors, looking at the wounded land that was, finally, beginning to heal. The quiet that settled over the Verde Valley was deeper than the silence that had come before. It was not the quiet of fear, or of a land holding its breath. It was the quiet of exhaustion, and the slow, aching work of rebirth. The official word from the territorial capital arrived 4 weeks after the flood, carried by a lone rider. The commissioner's report, backed by the Army's investigation, had been absolute. Harlan Collier's contracts were ruled null and void, rendered invalid by the clear evidence of bribery and federal fraud. The survey of 1849, validated by Evelyn's photographs and her grandfather's indelible mark, was affirmed as the only legal boundary for the Enda. The railroad, that great engine of progress, was forced to change its course. The investors in the East, faced with a public scandal and the staggering cost of the flood, abandoned the Coyote Pass route. The Iron Snake was diverted 30 miles to the south, a costly and humiliating detour that would bypass Red Mesa entirely. The town, born of a boom, would not die, but it would have to learn to live a different, slower life. Captain Mercer remained only long enough to see the new territorial marshal, a man from Prescott, installed. His resignation from the Army was accepted. On the morning of his departure, he came to the rebuilt structure that was now the heart of the town. Evelyn was grinding corn with Sani, the rhythmic sound of the stone a comfort. Mercer stopped in the doorway, his new civilian clothes looking strange on him. "Dr. Hart," he said. He did not look at her, but at the structure, at the NDE children and white children playing together in the dust. "I wanted to apologize, not just for my actions, but for my hesitation." "You found your conscience, Captain," Evelyn said quietly. "A man should not have to look for it," he replied. He placed a small, folded paper on the table. It was a letter, addressed to the community. In it, he apologized for choosing his orders over the law, for failing to act until the crisis was upon them. It was a full confession of his moral failure. He turned to leave and saw Chayton watching him from the shadows of the porch. The two men looked at each other, the soldier and the warrior. No words were exchanged. Mercer nodded once, a gesture of profound, weary respect. Chayton nodded back. Mercer mounted his horse and rode east, disappearing into the rising sun. A man finally free of his uniform. The aid station, rebuilt with new pine and adobe bricks made from the flood's own mud, became known simply as the meeting house. It was, as Nalin had wished, the literal and spiritual center of the new Red Mesa. Evelyn's clinic was in the back, a room that smelled of carbolic acid, clean linen, and the wild herbs Sani now stored there. The main room was for everything else. It was a school. Evelyn, with Taza as her assistant, taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to a mixed class of 7 Ende children and 4 children of the miners who had stayed. In turn, Nalin and Sani taught them the history of the valley, the names of the plants, and the stories of the land. It was a court. When a dispute arose over stray cattle or a diverted water ditch, the elders of the ND and the White Town leaders met, not with rifles, but with Chaitin mediating. He, who had once been hunted, was now the valley's primary peacemaker. And it was a place for memory. Nalin, her eyes clear and sharp, sat with Evelyn one evening. The old woman watched as Evelyn carefully catalogued her glass plate negatives, storing them in wooden boxes. "Your box of light holds many truths," Nalin said, Sani translating. "But it was not the truth that saved us." "What saved us, then?" Evelyn asked, looking up. "The water," Nalin said. "The flood. It washed away the lines. The good houses and the bad. It made everyone equal. It made you see. The miner saw the Apache pull him from the mud. The soldier saw the doctor heal the man who tried to kill her. When people finally learned to see each other," Nalin finished, her voice a low, powerful whisper. "The land will stay. It will not be taken." That was the new story of Red Mesa. The old rumor of the Indian lover was gone, washed away with the rest of the filth. The new rumor, spoken with a grudging respect in the rebuilt saloon and around the end fires, was that the Apache warrior and the woman doctor had faced down a flood, a railroad, and the government, and had taught the whole damn valley how to live together. Evelyn and Chaitin's life was the work. There was no formal wedding, no preacher in a black coat, no piece of paper filed with the new marshal. Their commitment, sealed in the storm with the gift of turquoise, had been a private truth. It needed no public ceremony. They lived in the small, sturdy cabin that had been built adjoining the meeting house. Their nights were spent not in passion, but in a deep, weary intimacy, washing the dust of the day from their faces in a shared bowl of water, tending to the small herb garden they had planted, or simply sitting in silence, the quiet between them a comfort stronger than any word. One night, months after the flood, they stood under the vast, clear desert sky. The stars were brilliant, sharp as chips of ice. The land was breathing, a cool, quiet sigh. "It is peaceful," Evelyn whispered. She was leaning against his shoulder, the weariness of a long day in the clinic settling into her bones. "It is healing," he said. His hand found hers, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "Collier is in prison, but there are other men like him. The world is large, and it is hungry." "Men will come," he said. It was a statement of fact. "But we are here now. This is our home." He looked at her, his face visible in the starlight, his expression clear. "We stay, and we care for each other." She leaned her head against his chest, closing her eyes. "We stay," she repeated, "and care for each other." It was their only vow. It was more than enough. It was the promise of a shared future, of children who might one day be born into this valley, children who would carry the blood of both worlds, children who would be safe. The next spring, the valley, scarred but fertile, exploded with life. The new channels of water, born from Collier's violent act, had irrigated plains that had been dry for a generation. The color green, once so rare, was everywhere. Evelyn had her camera set up on its tripod outside the meeting house. Her photography had become the town's memory, documenting the rebuilding, the new growth, the faces of the children as they grew. A small boy ran to her, laughing. He was holding a spray of bright yellow desert marigold. It was the same boy whose smile she had captured on her first day in Red Mesa, the child who had been the first hook of her connection to this place. He was healthy now, strong, his caution replaced by a bright, confident joy. He offered her the flowers, a gift. Evelyn smiled. She reached out to take them. She looked at her own hand. It was the hand of a doctor, stained with chemicals and marked by work. On her wrist, a simple leather cord held the thin, brilliant blue strip of turquoise. The boy, seeing her hand, placed his own small, brown hand into her palm, a gesture of absolute, simple trust. Evelyn, her heart full, looked at their joined hands, the pale skin and the brown, the ancient stone of the sky, and the fresh, living flower, the survivor and the future. The circle was complete. With her free hand, she reached for the shutter cable. The world was quiet. There was no thunder, no explosion, no flood. There was only the sound of the wind in the new cottonwood leaves. The shutter clicked. It was the sound of a long, warm, steady breath, the breath of the land, after the storm, finally at peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel Wild West Tales and like the video. And if you want to help this story be heard by more people, please hit that hype button. It really helps. Thank you.